week 11 of the fantasy football season. Here's the top 36 wide receivers. I'm ranking this week number 1, Ja'Marr Chase of the Cincinnati Bengals. Chase coming off a monster ball game, over 200 yards, 3 touchdowns last week. I know this week we're not going to see anything close to that number-wise, but week in and week out, Ja'Marr Chase is always one of the best wide receivers. And this week at Los Angeles, in a tight contested ball game, I think he goes out there once again and has a good ball game. Number 2, Justin Jefferson of the Minnesota Vikings. Jefferson, it was a down week last week. Sam Darnold was trying to force to Jefferson too much instead of letting the game come to him and get things going. But this week, a decent matchup at the Tennessee Titans. I know their secondary has been an okay secondary at times, with Snead being one of the better corners in all pro football. But Justin Jefferson, usually we've seen it throughout his career. After a down game, he comes back with a big game. So this week, I expect a bounce back. Number 3, Nico Collins of the Houston Texans. I thought Collins was going to play in last week's game after he got activated off the injured reserve, but he didn't play, obviously. But this week, I think he returns. This Texan team, after a bad loss where they were up 23-7, even though it was versus a great team in the Detroit Lions, I think they want to put Collins out there. And this week, it's a great matchup to come back, get them battle with Texas at the Dallas Cowboys, where their secondary can't stop anyone. So I think Nico Collins, he'll be back and put in a good ball game for A.J. Brown of the Philadelphia Eagles. So this Eagle team, they've really taken off, and they're putting up a lot of numbers and putting up a lot of points since A.J. Brown returned to the lineup a few weeks ago. So A.J. Brown, it seems like weekly, he's getting 100 yards or at least 50, 60 yards and finding the end zone. And this week, in a beatable matchup versus the Commanders, I like him once again as a top 5 option. Number 5, Amon-Ra St. Brown of the Detroit Lions. So St. Brown, it's been a steady season once again. Sam Laporta, we'll see if he plays in this ball game or not. But St. Brown, he's got the knack for the end zone. We know he's a PPR machine. I know some games he's had a couple down games here and there, but this week in a great matchup versus the Jacksonville Jaguars, I think he goes out there, has another big performance. Number 6, Cooper Kupp of the Los Angeles Rams. Cooper Kupp, he looks healthy. Him and Matthew Stafford, they're hitting, they're going out there and make plays. Last week was a tough loss, no doubt about it, with the Dolphins in town on Monday Night Football. But this week, a good matchup with the New England Patriots, where their secondary for the majority of the season has had trouble versus great receivers stopping them. So I think Cooper Kupp goes out there and has another good game. Number 7, his teammate Puka Nacua of the Los Angeles Rams. So Puka Nacua, when healthy, one of the best wide receivers in all the league. And that's why he was a late first, early second round pick in most fantasy drafts. But obviously, most of the season, he's been out with a knee injury. But last week, went out there, 18.8 fantasy points in PPR leagues. And this week in New England, I think it's a great matchup for him. Number 8, Terry McLaurin of the Washington Commanders. Him and Jaden Daniels, it's been a great connection all season long for this Commander team. And that's a big part why they're up there as well this season, is one of the best teams in the NFC. So this week in an NFC East matchup for first place at the Philadelphia Eagles, I think we're going to see scoring on the board between both teams. And I think Scary Terry goes out there, has a good ball game. Number 9, Tyreek Hill of the Miami Dolphins. I know he's not 100% with the wrist injury. He still goes out there. He's a tough guy, no doubt about it. This week, a good matchup versus the Vegas Raiders. I know the numbers are down even with Tua back in the lineup the last few weeks of the season. But this week, it's a good matchup versus the Raiders, and Hill did find the end zone last week as well. So I think he could have one of his bigger games this week, and it's a good matchup. It is 10, Zay Flowers of the Baltimore Ravens. Last week, I know it was a down game, but we know the upside is Zay Flowers, number 1 target in this offense. I know still they prefer Lamar Jackson, Derrick Henry running the football and playmaking over Zay Flowers. But like I said, no one's really come close to being that number 1 target in the offense all season long. I know Andrews, he's had a couple games here and there. Rashad Bateman, he's been an okay number 2 wide receiver. And then we acquired from a few weeks ago, Deontay Johnson has been a non-factor. So this week, Zay Flowers, all game, where it's going to be a great game, no doubt about it. I think Flowers bounces back with a good performance. Number 11, George Pickens, staying in the same game of the Pittsburgh Steelers. So his season's turned around. His numbers have gone way up since Russell Wilson's been in the lineup over the last 3 weeks. And this offense is playing great football, so this week could be a potential high-scoring game between the two AFC North division rivals with the Ravens and the Pittsburgh Steelers. So George Pickens, he's a deep ball threat. Him and Russ are locked in, and we know Russ is still one of the better deep ball throwers in all pro football. So I think this week George Pickens once again goes out there, has a good game. Number 12, Garrett Wilson of the New York Jets. So Garrett Wilson, it's definitely been a good season for him. I know last week it was a down week, only 9 fantasy points in PPR leagues. But this week, a great matchup with the Indianapolis Colts coming to town. They really can't stop anyone. And you rarely see 2 weeks in a row Garrett Wilson not have a good game. So I think this Jet offense, after putting in a stinker last week at the Arizona Cardinals, take advantage of a home game versus a bad Indianapolis Colt defense. And Garrett Wilson, it's going to pay dividends for him. Number 13, CeeDee Lamb of the Dallas Cowboys. So CeeDee Lamb, his numbers definitely going to drop off with Cooper Rush in their quarterback, but the targets are going to still be there. And to be honest, there's no one really on this Dallas Cowboy offense. Maybe Jake Ferguson, but he's not a threat of over-targeting and overtaking the number one role with Cooper Rush at quarterback. So this week, another matchup where they're going to be trailing early and often, I believe, is this Dallas Cowboy team having to play catch-up and a lot of garbage time where CeeDee Lamb, some of his stats. I'm not saying the elite numbers are going to be there anymore for CeeDee Lamb, but still someone who's a solid back-and-one, high-2 option for fantasy owners. 14, Jayden Reed, the Green Bay Packers. So Jayden Reed, he had a couple ball games this season where he's been non-existent. This week, not a great matchup with the Bears, where their secondary is pretty solid in my opinion. But Jayden Reed, yard after catch, one of the best wide receivers in the league. Jordan Love, a week to heal, get a little bit healthy, is going to help this whole Green Bay Packer team as a whole. As we know, he's banged up with the groin injury going into the bye weeks. Jayden Reed this week goes out there and has a solid ball game. 15, DK Metcalf of the Seattle Seahawks. So DK Metcalf, he's a great wide receiver. He's expected to practice this week, expected to play. And pretty much this is the season here for Seattle on the brink with a tough matchup at the San Francisco 49ers, a team that's had their number, obviously, in the same division for many seasons. So Metcalf, we know he's a game breaker. We know he's a big-time wide receiver, big target. And this week, it's going to help everyone, I believe, for the Seattle Seahawks team. With Metcalf back in the lineup, so at San Francisco, it wouldn't be surprising to me if Metcalf picks up where he left off for the majority of the season. 16, Drake London of the Atlanta Falcons. So maybe I'm a little lower on London this week than other people. But Patrick Surtain, one of the best corners in the league. We saw last week DeAndre Hopkins, he didn't do much with Surtain on him. And Surtain, in my opinion, is the best corner. He's locked down a lot of good wide receivers this season. I know Kirk Cousins and Drake London definitely have the good rapport going down. But I still believe London could put up number 2 wide receiver numbers, but I just don't think he's an elite option this week with Surtain on him. 17, Courtland Sutton of the Denver Broncos. So the last 3 weeks, he's turned the season around and putting up numbers of Sutton. 2 games, over 100 yards. And last week at the Chiefs, he found the end zone in a tough matchup versus one of the better defenses in the league. So Courtland Sutton won a good matchup this week versus the Falcons. We just saw them get torched by Valdez-Scantling for 128 yards and 2 touchdowns. I'm not saying Sutton's going to go out there and do that, but he's easily the number 1 target in the passing game. And him and Bo Nix definitely have a good rapport going and starting to go out there and make plays. 18, Josh Downs of the Indianapolis Colts. So Josh Downs, he's the best receiver, in my opinion, on this Indianapolis Colts team. I know this week it's a middle-of-the-pack matchup where Sauce Gardner at times is going to cover Josh Downs. But Downs, he's got the speed. He can run all the routes. He can make the plays. And him and Joe Flacco are definitely locked in. So this week in a game where I believe they're going to be trailing a majority of it, and they have to throw, even though we know Jonathan Taylor's a talented back and he can do everything. Josh Downs has a good ball game. 19, Deebo Samuel of the San Francisco 49ers. So Deebo, it's been an up and down year for him, and injuries once again have been the main vocal point. But with Brandon Ayuk out, obviously more targets are going to be there for Deebo. We saw last week he had a good game, and we saw overall in that ball game a nice spread out in that one from Brock Purdy. Everyone got involved: Kittle, Deebo Samuel, Ricky Pearsall, Jawan Jennings. So this week versus a weak secondary of the Seahawks, I think Deebo goes out there, has a good game. 20, Darnell Mooney of the Atlanta Falcons. I'm big on Mooney. He's definitely moving up the ranking board over the last few weeks. I know this week not a great matchup with the Broncos, but Mooney, he's locked in with Kirk Cousins. Yard after catch, a great wide receiver, and a good deep ball threat as well. And Mooney, he was good with the Bears, but I know the last few seasons, he just wasn't targeted much by Justin Fields. But this season, a great offseason signing it was for this Atlanta Falcon team. And Mooney, like I said, he's been moving up the rankings weekly. 21, Davante Adams of the New York Jets. So Davante Adams, he's been middle of the pack since he's been a New York Jet over the last month of the season. And this week, it's definitely a good matchup versus the Indianapolis Colts, but it's tough for 2 wide receivers to go out there weekly and have monster performances with him and Garrett Wilson in the same lineup. So this week, I think Adams still a solid number 2 wide receiver. And I've said it in other videos about Adams. At over 30 years old, this is when wide receivers start to decline and the numbers start going down. And we've seen it with a guy like Keenan Allen as well, and even DeAndre Hopkins for the most part before he got traded away to the Kansas City Chiefs. 22, Devonta Smith of the Philadelphia Eagles. So Devonta Smith, he's been more boom or bust once again this season, where last season he was more consistent. So Devonta Smith, we know he's a big play wide receiver, but still, I believe he's a good number 2 wide receiver for fantasy owners. Not someone you obviously could count on as a number 1 option for your fantasy team, unless you got tons of bye weeks or just injuries. But this week it's a decent matchup versus the Commanders, a team he's got a good track record against over the last few seasons, obviously playing in the same division in the NFC East. And we know this is going to be a high-scoring game, obviously, where Thursday night ball games usually are. 23, DeAndre Hopkins of the Kansas City Chiefs. So far, he's fit pretty well with Patrick Mahomes and this Kansas City Chiefs team. So this week, a pretty decent matchup, I believe, at the Buffalo Bills, where both teams are going to go up and down the field. This is the game of the week for me between these two teams. And these are the two best teams, in my opinion, in the AFC, with obviously Baltimore and Pittsburgh right behind them as well. So Hopkins, like I said, he's been playing good football with Mahomes. Last week, the numbers were down a little bit, but rightfully so, with Surtain on him. But this week at Buffalo, I think he has a better game than last. 24, Cedric Tillman of the Cleveland Browns. So Tillman, the number 1 option in the passing game with Jameis Winston in this Brown team. And this guy's going out there, he's making plays weekly. It's either 100 yards or he's finding the end zone. So this week, a beatable matchup with the New Orleans Saints. We know they traded away Lattimore at the NFL trade deadline last week. I think Tillman could go out there and have another great performance, either finding the end zone or even, let's say, and getting 7 catches, 80, 90 yards in this ball game, because he's getting the targets, he's getting the looks, and he's making plays and finally breaking out where he's been on the bench for the last few seasons for this Brown team. 25, Calvin Ridley of the Tennessee Titans. So ever since the Hopkins trade a few weeks ago, Ridley's definitely getting more involved in the offense, and he's putting up fantasy points, where the last 2 out of 3 weeks he's had 20 or more fantasy points. But this week, a tough matchup versus one of the best defenses, in my opinion, in all pro football, versus the Minnesota Vikings. Even though I know the secondary is vulnerable to giving up points, Calvin Ridley to do it 2 weeks in a row to have a monster game, I find it hard to believe. And Will Levis, he's a quarterback that holds on to the football a lot and turns over that football a whole lot as well. So Ridley this week, still a startable option, obviously, but more of a flex option, I believe. 26, Jackson Smith-Njigba of the Seattle Seahawks. So JSN, it's been an up and down second year for him in the league. Well, I know a couple weeks ago, big ball game versus the Rams, 7 catches, 180 and 2 touchdowns, but that was without DK Metcalf in the lineup. And we've seen this season with DK in the lineup, his numbers are pretty much 10, 13 fantasy point range in PPR leagues. So this week, with DK most likely back and a tougher matchup at a decent 49 and deep. JSN, he's down at 26, 27, Jacoby Myers of the Vegas Raiders. Jacoby Myers, last few weeks, numbers have gone up, obviously, with Adams out of town and with Myers healthy. And pretty much him and Brock Bowers, the only 2 options in this passing game. Well, game, most likely, they're going to be trailing early and often in Miami. I think Myers goes out there once again and is a decent option. 28, Khalil Shakir of the Buffalo Bills. So in my opinion, he's the number 1 option in the passing game. Kincaid's banged up. We don't know if he's going to play for this Buffalo Bill team with a knee injury. And Amari Cooper, we don't know if he's going to play. But even if Cooper plays, he's still not up to snuff with the playbook. He's still not 100%. He hasn't played in a few. And I think Shakir, he's going to find holes in the defense. Good slot receiver, and pretty much any target that comes his way, he's been making the catch this season. 29, Tank Dell of the Houston Texans. So Tank Dell, it's been a decent second year for him. I believe his rookie season was better for him before he went down with injury last season. So this week, a great matchup at the Dallas Cowboys, where they have trouble with speedy wide receivers and deep ball threat wide receivers like Tank Dell. So I think Tank Dell could take the secondary off the top of this Dallas Cowboy team. 30, Jawan Jennings of the San Francisco 49ers. So Jennings returned from injury last week, and now he's filling in, him and PSL, to pick up the Brandon Ayuk role in the offense. And Jennings, he's a solid wide receiver. We saw early in the season he had a big ball game, 11 catches, 175 yards, 3 touchdowns. And we saw last week he had a nice ball game, over 15 fantasy points in PPR league. So when he gets opportunities with Ayuk out of the lineup, he's made the most of it, and he's been a productive wide receiver. 31, Ladd McConkey of the Los Angeles Chargers. So Ladd McConkey, he's a good slot guy. Him and Herbert have been building on rapport over the last few weeks, and this is a great matchup versus Cincinnati Bengals that obviously can't stop anyone all season long. So McConkey, he can work in the slot. He can line up on the outside if you need him to. And he's a good yard after catch and gadget type of wide receiver as well. 32, Jameson Williams of the Detroit Lions. So Williams returned off suspension last week. He made a few great catches and he took some big hits as well in that ball game at the Houston Texans. But now with a week under his belt and a great matchup versus Jacksonville secondary that can't stop anyone, it wouldn't be surprising to me if Williams goes out there and we see him catch a deep ball threat touchdown. But like I said, his targets have been limited all season long, and if he's not getting that deep ball, he's not putting up monster numbers. 33, DJ Moore of the Chicago Bears. See, he's fallen off big time as DJ Moore, and I think it's the Caleb Williams effect here, where he's holding on to the football way too long. He's taking big hits, and him and Moore just aren't on the same page with Justin Fields and DJ Moore. What a season they had together with the Chicago Bear team. So this Bear team, they've been struggling of late. They're not putting points on the board, but something's got to give, in my opinion. And maybe DJ Moore is doing this ball game, even though it's not a great matchup versus a decent Green Bay secondary. 34, Brian Thomas Jr. of the Jacksonville Jaguars. So the rookie, he's definitely fallen off the last couple weeks here with the rib injury, and obviously with Trevor Lawrence hurt and not in the lineup, and Mac Jones a downgrade obviously from Trevor Lawrence. So this week, it's going to be a game where they're going to be trailing early and often and have to play catch up and throw the football a whole lot, where Brian Thomas might just work his way into production. But like I said, the last couple weeks, failing to even reach 7 fantasy points in PPR leagues. Numbers have gone down, and he's tough to trust at Detroit. 35, Amari Cooper of the Buffalo Bills. So we'll see if he plays in this game. But like I said with Cooper early in the video, it's not 100% even if he plays in this game. That wrist injury has definitely been a problem for him. And he's also not into the playbook 100% as well. Only playing 2 games since he arrived last month in a deal to this Buffalo Bill team, and a tough matchup as well versus the Kansas City Chiefs. So with all those factors, I don't think it's a high ceiling for Cooper, even if he plays in the 36th and final receiver on rankings, Ricky Pearsall of the San Francisco 49ers. So last week, he definitely showed why he was a first-round pick in the NFL draft. A nice 46-yard touchdown. Him and Purdy are starting to get rapport. And he's a nice slot receiver and a speedy wide receiver and yard after catch ability. So this week, in a decent matchup versus the Seahawks, I think he could be a decent flex option, is Ricky Pearsall. So that's the top 36 wide receivers I'm ranking for week 11 of the fantasy football season.